On behalf of the Faculty Senate here at Prince George's Community College, I welcome you heartily to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion presentation. I know this is a very important topic for us, and these are interesting times, and no better time to have these kinds of presentations than the right time. Diversity, equity, and inclusion must be led by academic institutions. So corporations must follow us. We should not follow them. And finally, Prince George's Community College must be the leader in this conversation. So we are taking the lead in ensuring that we bring these kinds of workshops and or presentations to you so that you can spread it across the campus. Diversity must be intentional. You have to want to be included, feel included. And so as we grow in our own existence here at the college, I hope that we will want to see more of this. We will want to be intentional about inclusiveness, that we would want to be the trendsetters in our departments, in our divisions, across the campus, in our classrooms, and that we set about doing so with the integrity that it requires to be successful when doing this kind of work. So I hope the presentation will be very useful for you, and we hope to continue the conversation further on. Dr. Dukes is not here. Oh, I want, just as a matter of...
She's right here.
Oh, great. As a matter of importance, I would like to ensure that you, if you pre-registered for this presentation, you know somewhere in my head it's a conference, right? If you pre-registered for this presentation, I would ask you to sign the form that is there for the pre-registration employees, pre-registered employees. If you did not, please sign the other form, because I've already sent to Dr. Davis the list so that it will be on your transcripts in Cornerstone. And if you did not pre-register, then sign the other list and I will hand it to her before she leaves. Okay? Oh, Dr. Dukes is here. Welcome, Dr. Dukes. At this time, I would like, just for purposes of ensuring that you know the people who are responsible for planning this conference, the Faculty Senate. And I would like for the members who are here to stand and to be recognized by your divisions. Thank you. At this time, we would like to introduce the president of Prince George's Community College, Dr. Charlene Dukes. And the person who will introduce Dr. Dukes is Dr. Yuda Andriani. Sorry about that, talking about diversity and inclusion. Andriani, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Dukes is the president of Prince George's Community College. She has served the college for many years, the last 10 of which she has served as the president of this wonderful institution. Our president is an award-winning president. Having won so many awards, we would be here all evening detailing them. Dr. Dukes was recently recognized as one of the 100 most powerful women in the Washington metropolitan area, and she was inducted into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame in 2013. Dr. Dukes holds a Bachelor's of Science in Secondary Education with an English concentration from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, as well as a Master's and Doctorate in Administrative and Policy Studies from University of Pittsburgh. Please help us welcome our President, Dr. Charlene Dukes.
student. I was 10 minutes late for class, and hopefully I won't get a demerit or anything for that. I want to thank Dr. Clover Baker-Brown, the Faculty Senate, Faculty Organization, for inviting me to be here this afternoon. Just to make a few comments, and I'll stay as long as I can. Thanks to all of you for being here. I think at no maybe other point in our history is it so obvious that we have to be thinking about these topics of diversity, inclusion, equity, and even the unconscious biases that we all carry in one form or another, and how that impacts our colleagues every day, the students we serve, the communities in which we live, work, and play. So I do want to thank the faculty organization for providing an opportunity for us to hear from an expert. And I've done the research, you know, Googling people can tell you a lot about them. So I want to thank our presenter for what she will bring to the table. I know that we're looking forward to listening very intently and having the opportunity where and when appropriate for some candid, honest, and truthful dialogue. That's how we move forward in this world, and that's how we support the people who are all around us. Want to thank you for being here. Want to thank those of you who sit on the diversity committee. You know, we've been engaged in this work for some time, and every day we find ways to continue to move it forward and to continue to be involved in it. So thank you, Dr. Baker-Brown, thank our presenter, and thank all of you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Dukes, and our president is better than your president, because our president was the Woman of the Year. Now we'll ask Professor Annette Savoy to come up and introduce Dr. Clay Raley, the EVP of the college.
Good afternoon. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Clayton Raley. He is our Executive Vice President and Provost for Teaching, Learning, and Student Success. Dr. Raley assumed his new role on January 16, 2018. He provides leadership, direction, and oversight to the college's teaching, learning, and student success area, which is responsible for serving the holistic learning needs of our students. Please welcome Dr. Clayton Raley.
Thank you. I'm thrilled that this speech is happening today for a number of reasons. I want to focus on the unconscious part here, though, in my brief comments. As you may know, my background is in philosophy, and one of the enduring questions or commands is to know oneself. And there's been a great debate on whether one can know oneself and how fully one can know oneself. And so I look forward today to hearing some insights and some comments and to get some tools for all of us to help to know ourselves a little bit better. Bias, and the bias that we're kind of talking about that works against diversity and equity, is insidious. I think perhaps even more insidious is the unconscious bias, because it's not intentional, it's not willed, and therefore can be much more damaging. So I'm looking forward to hearing what we have to learn today in terms of how we become less unconscious and more willed, more knowing of our own selves in this context. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for the faculty organization for organizing this.
Thank you, Dr. Raley. At this time, we'll ask, well, Dr. Barty is on your program, but Dr. Barty had an emergency, and so we're going to ask Professor Marcy Dawson to do the honors of introducing Dr. Audrey Davis.
I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Audrey Davis. She is an organizational development practitioner with over 30 years experience. Her work is primarily revolved around organizational and professional development. Dr. Davis holds a doctorate in organizational systems and leadership from Argosy University, and her doctoral research looked at how employee engagement and work locus of control impacts job satisfaction. Her master's and undergraduate degrees are from the University of Pittsburgh. She is currently the Interim Director of Professional and Organizational Development here at Prince George's Community College. Let's welcome Dr. Audrey Davis.
Thank you very much, Clover, for having me here. I apologize for my voice. It's coming and going. It is always a pleasure to be in an environment that stimulates growth and learning. And working with Clover in terms of the professional development opportunities that we have here is always a pleasure. I'd like to say to those of the faculty members who have not come to the advising training to please come and join us. The last sessions are going to be this month, and we will not be holding any in May. So I'll be sending out an announcement with those final dates, and I look forward to serving you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. With faculty advising being one of the most seminal pieces of work of this faculty senate, and then this being the next one, we had to have someone talk about, we had to have someone talk about faculty advising as we move forward into taking on this as an integral piece of the job that we as faculty do. It's very important that we understand that we have to own it. Those of us who are going to do it, we have to own it. And so, Dr. Davis, thank you. And when's the last?
Very last session. It's on the 30th.
Okay, on the 30th. After that, you won't be able to do it anymore. I'm just kidding. I would like at this point to, before we go to the next speaker, acknowledge our deans who are here. I do see my own dean, Ms. Nicole Currier, and I do see Dr. Christine Barrow, and I do see the Associate Vice President, Dr. Mara Doss, and Dr. Bev Reed, our Executive Director for Adjunct Faculty. Barbara Denman, TLSS. Can't go wrong with that, right? TLSS.
Dr. What?
All right, and Dr. Deidre Hill, a former employee of the college, visiting us from Alvernia University in Pennsylvania. Welcome. At this time, I would ask Professor Lou Holder to introduce our speaker of the evening. Professor Holder.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. Dr. Diane Forbes-Berthoud is the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of California, San Diego, where her responsibilities included strategic planning, advancing institutional effectiveness, serving as liaison and consultant to human resources, and leading diversity-focused campus-wide initiatives and community engagement. As a member of the Vice Chancellor's leadership team, she represented the Vice Chancellor on high-level task force, advisory groups, and system-wide working groups at the University of California. She is currently spearheading the development of UC San Diego's first ever strategic plan for inclusive excellence, a strategic framework that entails extensive campus engagement and action, assessment, accountability to shape the university's future. She has over 23 years of experience working in higher education, nonprofit, and government as she brings a proven record of success in organizational communication and development. strategic planning, diversity training, and development and assessment of EDI initiatives. Dr. Forbes-Berthoud is an affiliate faculty of George Washington University in Leadership Studies and faculty emeritus for the RISE San Diego Urban Leadership Program that trains and empowers urban leaders to take effective and substantial action to transform urban communities. She was the lead consultant in the county-wide Organizational Effectiveness and Diversity Initiative in Montgomery County, Maryland, where she led an assessment and planning process to improve organizational effectiveness and to strengthen equity, diversity, and inclusion for thousands of employees in the county government. She was previously an associate professor and department chair of communications at Trinity University, a visiting professor at George Mason University, and a senior fellow at the University of Maryland College Park in leadership and public policy. She has been awarded faculty fellowships from Georgetown University, the Washington Area Women's Foundation, and the Interactivity Foundation in the areas of leadership, diversity, community-based research, public policy, and dialogue. She has taught graduate and undergraduate courses in intercultural communications, organizational communications, leadership and discourse, and diversity. She also served as ombudsperson at the U.S. Capitol in the area of conflict resolution and communications. Dr. Forbes-Berthoud earned her BA in communication and certified in Spanish translation and interpersonal interpretation from Barry University in Miami. And she received her master's and doctorate degrees in organizational communication and social psychology from Howard University in Washington, D.C. That's a lot, and it's well-deserved. Please help us welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Forbes-Berthoud.
Thank you very much, Professor, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you all? Great. Should I say happy Thursday? Who's looking forward to the weekend? Who's looking forward to going back to California? What a pleasure to be here. I am so happy to be invited by Dr. Baker Brown and the Faculty Senate and to have met Dr. Raley and some of the other administrators, staff, faculty, and students today. And as I was listening to all of that over the last 23 to 25 years, do you remember Urkel? Did I do that? And I thought about all the places I've been and all the people I've met and now where I am, and I'm thinking some of what I'm attempting to do and some of what you're attempting to do is too big for us. Where I'm on my campus, we have 10,000 faculty members, 15,000 staff, and we are approaching 40,000 undergraduates. This is not taking into account pharmacy, engineering, medicine, or some of the professional schools. And so when I think that the Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor have tasked me with working on a large-scale equity, diversity, and inclusion initiative for our campus, I'm going, I need help. And I do have the help because what we've worked on is building the capacity for more than 250 to 300 leaders, if you will, at the ground level. So deans, provosts, directors, other assistant vice chancellors like myself, business officers, what we call MSOs, management services officers. We're building out a lead fellowship program. We're building out diversity programs and diversity champions programs because I will not be able to do it alone, nor will our office be able to do it alone. And everything that we're doing on our campus and anything that I recommend or when I consult to large systems like Montgomery County, it's always about thinking through who our partners will be. And this is the leadership hat coming out now, that one is not a leader without the followership, right? So we're always working on building capacity, working on collaborative models of input and decision making. So I'm hoping that, as Dr. Raley was saying to me earlier, this is the beginning of many such sessions, and you'll have other speakers and other programs to build capacity and work together on some of these issues. So it is my pleasure to be here, and I thank you for having me, and I thank you for the opportunity to share some of the things I know, and I look forward to calling on you. I am that person after 10 minutes, I'm tired of talking. You there, Annette, why don't you tell me what you think? I learned a couple of names today. So So what we'll talk about today together is really an overview of what explicit and implicit biases are, otherwise known as conscious or unconscious biases. We'll also talk about what are the types of biases and how are they manifested. So what are the forms that bias may show up? And then to learn about the ways to mitigate that bias. And then finally, how does that apply to organizational contexts and specifically to higher education contexts? So based on what I understand, the topics that are important to the campus here and also what's in the current research, I thought I would share some of those things and hear from you if this is where we want to go. Does this sound good to you? Are we ready to go? All right, well, we're already here. So first, a test.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Did you get it? Do you want to play it again? How many passes does the team in white make? Did anybody make a count, or do you have a guess? 12. Yes, sir, in the back?
14.
14. Others? Okay, let's do it one more time, and then we'll continue. Get rid of this screen right here and take you back.
This is an awareness test. This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13.
Who won? Who won?
But did you see the walking bear?
Let's do this again.
He's right in the middle of the screen. Watch it comes off from the right.
Okay, so this is a campaign, and so it ends with, it's easy to miss, what you're not looking for. This was a campaign actually in Europe to promote safety on the roads, and that when you're not looking for a cyclist or a motorcyclist, you might just hit someone. We don't want that to happen, and that's certainly the case in New York and California and some other places where I've lived. What does this have to do with bias? And why would we, at the very beginning of a conversation like this, take a look at this video with a moonwalking bear? How is that connected to our conversation today? Anybody want to take a guess or give me your best take on the relevance of this moonwalking bear? Yes, ma'am. Tell me your name.
Melinda.
Hi, Melinda.
So it's an example of selective perception.
Selective perception. Do you want to say more?
Just that I'm focusing in on the team in white.
Right, right.
And I'm not looking at anything else in the picture which is there.
Yes.
But I'm selecting to see one thing.
Thank you, Melinda. Anyone else? Anything else comes to mind for you? Or what was your experience watching that? Are you upset that you got the wrong count? Is that what somebody said? 14. It wasn't 14. Yeah, so selective perception, not seeing what's there because we're focused on only one piece of data, right? And so sometimes we're focused on, well, what kind of university, what kind of college, or what kind of student, or where does this person live? We're focused on that, and we're missing, oh, look, they speak 5 other languages, or they've lived in these other places, or their parents come from here, and that might help us with this program. We miss pieces there of that conversation. Let's move on. So what then is bias, and how does that relate to the moonwalking bear? So what we know from University of California, San Francisco researchers, and also some from Hopkins and UNC, is that bias is some kind of prejudgment, and it can be for or against a particular individual, person, or thing. It can also be against a set of groups or groups of people. And so most often we think that bias refers to something against. But if we favor something or we are against something in a way that is unjust or unfair, that would be what we would consider bias. So I thought maybe I could use an ice cream example, but it's perfectly fair to love something with crunch in there, or to love something with caramel in there. But if I prefer just people from the East Coast, which is where our family grew up and everything else, and now I live on the West Coast, from time to time we're in rooms and they go, "You East Coast people," and I'm like, watch it, and it's fun and jokes. But if I think there's something about my having studied here, or my children growing up here, and us having a family here that person is using as a negative interaction, then it's a different kind of conversation. It's not comedy anymore. It becomes something that's related to bias. This can be related to a thing, a group, an individual, as I mentioned before, and most often they have negative consequences. What we need to clarify is a bias in and of itself is not harmful, as I said. Caramel crunch as opposed to peanut, as opposed to something else. That's a preference, and it can be a bias. But once we think about the unfairness piece, or we're making decisions without enough information or enough data, then we start to have a conversation about what that means and what those negative consequences may be for an individual, a system, or a group. Explicit bias, I want to distinguish between explicit and implicit. These are biases we know we have. We deliberately hold them, and we're fine with that. When you get more information about the bias that you have, and you are intent then, or I'm intent, on making that kind of change, this is where explicit biases can be considered opportunities. And so if I know, I just don't like people from the East Coast, even though this is where we're from, then that's some information for me to begin to think, ask, and then act. To think in ways about, why is that? Is that based on a set of experiences? Did I have a negative employment experience? Is it as a student? Is it when I lived in New York, they used to shove me around on the bus or the subway, and so therefore, just to do some thinking around the why of that bias. So implicit bias are those social stereotypes, the projections we make about groups that are often untrue and are assumptions. And these are stereotypes we make about people by using schemas, ways of thinking about who they are and making sense of who they are that impact our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, our attitudes, our decisions even. And everything from our schemas then inform what we do from that point. What's important here is that they're social stereotypes. They're groupings. They're ideas and thoughts about people, which may or may not be true, generalizations which are unfair and unfounded in many cases, and they unconsciously affect how we behave. This is hard for people to take, but it often does not align with what our conscious values are. So I would never hurt a child. I would never insult a coworker. I would never, and fill in the blank, I would never insult somebody from the East Coast, whatever those are. So the unconscious piece is, it often surprises us and sometimes it shames us. Because what we do in terms of our prejudices that are unconscious or implicit don't align with what we believe. So, I'll give you another example. I grew up in a house with mostly girls. I had all sisters, and there was my mom and my dad. And so all the while, I have these two sisters. I know how girls are, and everything's all great. My mom's strong, my dad's strong. And then I grew up to study more about women in leadership. That was my work at Harvard University and beyond at Georgetown and other places. My first child was then a girl. And I have older women relatives who said, "You shouldn't let your daughter play soccer," when she was younger. She's almost off to college now. 6, 7, 8, and she was pretty good. She was fast. They both had these long legs from their dad. And I thought, well, why? And my older women relatives said things like, "She's gonna get dirty. You know, she's gonna hurt herself." No, you were laughing. I'm serious. This is really what they said. And it was even worse because when I was growing up, girls did not play soccer. I don't know if any of you are in that age group at all. Girls did not play soccer. It wasn't a thing until Mia Hamm in 1998 or so. There was no World Cup for women or anything like that. So there was no modeling. And so don't have her play soccer. It's not a good thing. She'll get dirty. And then they said, it's a boys' sport. So now I'm raising them in the 2000s, right? She's going to be 18 next year. I'm raising them in the 2000s thinking, anybody can do anything they want to do, right? If she wants to play hockey, if she wants to play lacrosse, if she wants to play soccer, if she wants to play volleyball. And so I thought, yeah, malarkey, as somebody we know said. So I ignored them. But deep in the night, and the next day, and the next season, don't you think I was thinking about that question? Should my daughter play soccer? So on her own, she dropped it. Her brother picked it up, and the family was like, yeah. And then she started to play volleyball. They were a little happier, but they still were not happy. Then they said, why do you have her out there on the court? She's gonna hurt herself. Have her study music, because I studied classical piano and voice. Have her study music like you did. That's what girls do. So here we are in this tussle in the family. My mom is almost 80, and my dad, he was saying, oh, let the girl do what she wants to do, but my mom was saying, no, no, no. You know what, don't you have family members who contradict themselves on different kinds of things? So here's how the unconscious bias works. I believe that boys and girls and everyone in between can do anything they want to do, right? If you want to do music or soccer or lacrosse or run, jump, play baseball or none of the above, it's all good. Be who you can be, your best self, your best person. That's a message we've given to the children. But as I said, in the midnight hour, and when I am not thinking, when I am not conscious of what's happening, somewhere in there I thought about saying to her, and I actually did start teaching her piano because of what my mom said. I was like, oh my, would you like to learn piano? We got a piano from Costco right there in Gaithersburg, and sat her down, and I was like, this is middle C, and I did the whole thing. And if I really thought about it, there was some implicit bias there where I was hoping she might kind of shuffle away from the harmful sports and then go to do what little girls do, just stay inside and practice piano. One may say, well, that sounds like backward thinking, and my more modern contemporary voice says it is, but because of those formative lessons, I have internalized, and I'm owning that, I have internalized some element of, she might hurt herself. So guess what? After 10 years, she stopped playing volleyball, and I was like, maybe this is a good thing, but I was also like, but you almost played for 10 years. It could get you to college. She wants to go to Stanford or UCLA or maybe come to the East Coast. And now she's running track. So I'm like, I just can't get away from this, right? But I think it was a good experience for our family because it was a test for her and for me to test. What do I actually believe? I say I believe that kids can do anything they want to do. But implicitly, I know, and this is the struggle in our family and in my life, I know we have to contend with what my conscious values are and the implicit voice, which comes from family relationships and family history. Does any of that make sense? Oh, anybody wants to share anything of somewhere that you've seen that? I just gave a gender example with sports. Yes, sir.
So I would say that the media and the acceleration of social media has played a significant part in explicit and implicit bias because now people who did not have a voice now have a voice, and some of them are using it in not so pleasant terms, and it might, now that you see it more or hear it more, it might sway you in some way or another. Do you think that that has elevated people's implicit and explicit biases and thoughts?
Absolutely, absolutely, because what we see often normalizes a particular context. So if I see a lot of high school, which I've seen online actually, a lot of high school kids bullying, beating, hurting others, and people start watching this for show. Have you seen that? I work on a college campus. They watch it for show, and or somebody's in distress on the sidewalk, in the subway, for us by the beach or whatever, and instead of assisting, supporting, helping, doing what we think is the ethical and the right thing to do, what do kids now do? They flip out their phones and they start recording it as though it were a spectacle, and not as though there was actually a human being in distress. So I agree with you. It influences both conscious and unconscious biases and actions as well. Because the more they see it, is the more normal it becomes. To beat someone to a pulp, it doesn't matter what your background is. It's just like, oh, you're beating that person, I'll just jump on that person. They don't even know why. Of course, parts of mob mentality and groupthink there. So very often the ways in which we act unconsciously contradict what we say our conscious values are. Girls can do anything, girl power! And yet I'm like, she might hurt herself. And it also develops early in life, which I just explained, the dangerous and probably in some ways good side of this, depending on what side you're on, if you think about it in that way, it strengthens over time. And so a particular view has got to be challenged. We have to ask each other difficult questions. We have to ask ourselves difficult questions. And I have to say, if I really believe that K through 12 children can do anything, co-curricular, extracurricular, curricular activities well, then I will attend to both boys and girls, and I will attend to every college student that I teach and every group with which I work to make them better, right? But what we have to know is the older we get, the more experiences we have, sometimes those biases strengthen, which can be a very frightening thing. the comforting and perhaps the frightening thing is we all have biases. We all perceive and treat people with the schemas that I mentioned before, these social constructs, these psychological constructs, the stories we tell ourselves about other people. We all have these stories that we tell. And I'm getting to that age where I'm saying, well, they're in here, I can't say it, but I'm beginning to say, these young people, I'm getting to that stage, right? Did you get my email? I'm like, when did you email me? 2 a.m. And it's like a 9 a.m. class. I'm like, for real? And I'm thinking, this is not instant message, it's not texting, it's email. So give me a business day at least. You know, so I'm getting to that stage where I might say that. And so there's, I have 2 teenagers, by the way. And so there's some way in which I have a story, and maybe you do too, about people from a particular age group. I could be very wrong, and I am in many cases, and I could be very right. But the schema is the construct that I create, the narrative that I create about that group, and then I begin to act in ways that justify what I believe. What also happens in addition to strengthening our beliefs over time is that our beliefs are exacerbated when we're stressed, when we are multitasking, when we're under pressure, when we're pressed for time. And this is a new word in the Webster's Dictionary. Did you hear about the word hangry? So that's a word now in the dictionary, so I can use it. So if you're hungry and angry all together, our biases are exacerbated, right? And so in high task, high stress, multitasking type situations, they're made even more complicated when we're trying to do that. So do we all agree that we all have biases? And okay,
Yeah.
good, this is a relief. And that's wonderful, because then we all can begin to do some work around that. If you're interested, Harvard University and I think Connecticut also has a few tests, but Harvard is really the leader here. There's a Harvard University Implicit Association test. You may have heard of it. I see quite a few nodding heads. Great. If you just Google it, just take it. My Korean-American friend, she actually grew up around Italians in Los Angeles. She found that her bias was against first-generation Korean Americans. Her parents are Korean, and she grew up in LA, and in the test she found that she was biased against first-generation or recent Korean immigrants. And she's thinking, how can that be? My family's from Korea. So we started thinking about it more. I told her my gender story. I was like, how can it be? I'm all about girl power. And so she's like, yeah. So this doing the test is just information, and there are different ones along age group, gender, and some other groups too. So that will help us learn more about where those biases lie and what we could do about those. So let's complicate things even more. So Gardner, Schwartz, and Rowe, and there are many other models like this, provide for us a model to think about diversity in comprehensive, complicated, integrated, and intersectional ways. So here, Gardner, Schwartz, and Rowe centralize or center personality. So this is our makeup. This is who we are, whether you draw your energy from external or internal, introverted, extroverted. Are you more outgoing? Do you prefer to journal and read? That's who you are in your core, right? And you choose your activities. Sometimes your school, whether a liberal arts, a large institution, a smaller institution, a neighborhood with people who look like you, an international neighborhood, you choose those kinds of things based on your personality and to some extent your preferences. Then there are what they call internal dimensions. These are core parts of your person, not just personality, a core part of your identity. What's important to you? And as I said, many of the authors put different things in different places, right? And so there are internal dimensions. So we talked about a bit about age. So me having teenagers and being a Gen Xer, and we talked about millennials, and then we talked about Gen Z. And so there are all these generations at work in our experiences: gender, race, ethnicity, physical ability, and sexual orientation. From their perspective, all core internal elements or dimensions of who someone is or someone's identity. Other aspects of identity are considered from their perspective external. Where you live, some aspects of income, socioeconomic status, SES, personal habits, recreation, religion, work experience, appearance, parental status, and so forth. These are considered external dimensions, as in some ways you can tell from where somebody is, how they're acting, perhaps what your personal habits are. If you're a smoker, if somebody's hiking, and you see them every Saturday when you go there, you can say, okay, this person is a hiker, this person is a runner. And so you can learn some things about someone externally, as well as it may not be as central as age, gender, race, and some other elements for some other folks. Important to us, too, are the organizational dimensions. Where you work, your level and your rank, union affiliation, that's big on our campus, we've had a lot of strikes lately, management status, functional level or classification, titles, for example, And when you think about some of these kinds of things, I know on our campus, and I'm sure it's the same for you, depending on one's title, you may get a corner office with a view, or you may get a reserved parking space. Those kinds of things are also elements of diversity, though not as central as the others. I'll pause there and let you take it in for a few seconds. What do you see there? What stands out for you? And why do you think this is important in a discussion about diversity? And we're going to be talking about bias as well. What stands out, or what do you notice? Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Christine.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, so one of the things that's interesting about this are the ones that are sometimes the biggest challenges and also the ones that are associated also with explicit bias are the ones closest to the core. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are based on that.
I can speak to that when you hear some more voices. Others, what do you notice, or what questions do you have? I can speak to us. Yes.
Well, the internal dimensions, we have no control over those.
To some degree.
Well,
This is changing a bit now, isn't it? Yes, but for the most part, correct. Yes. No, absolutely. Yes. Y'all, I live in California, y'all. Yes, that would be, yes. So here could be gender identity, gender expression, gender transitions, and so forth. That could be all here. So when I write the next book chapter, I'll put that in there, okay? But yes, other observations? Yes, sir, you had your hand up? Okay. What else do you see? Notice? Yes,
There's more about work than I was expecting. I just wasn't expecting multiple categories about your profession.
Work, profession, rank, seniority, field, etc. Yes, more about work than she was expecting. Great. Others?
So somebody questioned the idea,
Yes.
you said something about gender, but I think gender would be fixed, but the appearance and how one presents to externally, that could be changed, but one's gender identity would be identifiable internally. Does that make sense? So that you're how you present externally to the world, that's why it falls under the yellow as opposed to the green. That would be my take on it.
Right. I mean,
So you could change it, but you can't change.
you can change it to transgender.
But you change the appearance. You don't change
The appearance, the expression, and your way of being in the world, which is in part gender.
Right, but the
Yes.
internal part would stay the same.
Because you're becoming.
For the most part. Yes, for the most part, yes. And I'm not giving a concrete answer, because for those who will identify as non-binary or gender fluid, today I will express myself as a woman, right? And so that's a part of it. So then, and so I will ask, what are your preferred gender pronouns to students or other administrators? And we do that often on our campus. Diane Forbes-Berthoud, gender pronouns, she, her, and hers. So I have some staff members who will say they. So Tay, who actually is from Columbia in New York, they will say they is my pronoun because I embody both. And so we respect and understand all of those. So yeah, so we could play with this and tell Garden, Schwartz, and Rowe, here's what's most central to me. Maybe gender is, for some people, work is more central than any of these things. I'm a teacher and that's the most important thing. Or I'm too old for this now, I'm 75 and this is important to be an elder. So your question, ma'am, so I can get back to it, about the things that cause the explicit biases are internal. Was that your question? Yes. Because they are more available for consumption, if you will, they're more available for others to see, yes. So people will see a young person, a woman, someone who's gay, somebody who's transgender, or so forth. And you might be able to identify those things more readily with the intern or an older person. It hurts me a lot to see how older persons are treated in our society. I see it on the sidewalks, in the bus, in the grocery stores. You know, sometimes you're just kind of trying to get through. No, excuse me, I'm sorry, or even do you need help? You know, so there is some age and gender bias as well that I've seen, as well as others. What else stands out for you? One more. Yes?
Well, there's assumptions that we make about people in these different categories.
All the time, absolutely. Yes. Yes, sir?
It's an interesting note that you separate spirituality and religion. To me, as part of my internal dimension, spirituality is probably more important to me than many, and it's not necessarily tied to my religion.
So there's some work now about spiritual but not religious, and that group, I think it's one of the largest groups in the United States now. Some people see them as connected and integrated, and others, I think this is what you're saying, that you don't see it as important as your religion. Is that what you just said? Did I hear you correctly?
No, I said my spirituality is more important. than my
Spirituality is more important than your religion, I understand. And so you are in that group, that you may be spiritual but not religious, more spiritual than you are religious. Others see them as connected and intertwined. Some of that we may not know. I wouldn't have known that by looking at you. I have a couple things in my head, maybe age, gender, race, but I wouldn't have access to that. And so those are some more external dimensions and further out. And so getting to know others, I've learned more information. Anything else that stands out? Is this complicating stuff for us? Yes, no? Yes? Would you like to, are you part of it? You said yes. All right, so let's imagine not just an individual, but let's imagine a group, an organizational system. And any one person can embrace, integrate any 7, 8, 10 of these components in their one life experience. Some information I'll have access to, as the gentleman talked about spirituality and religion, and some I won't. Then there's also what's most, this is Garden Schwartz and Rowe's model. There's also what's most important to you. For some people, religion will be at the center, or their occupation, or their gender, or their age group, or their qualifications. You know, for the military family members that I have, it's very important to them that you know that they were a U.S. Marine colonel, that you know this. And sometimes right after saying that, they'll say, commander in so-and-so special forces. That's the thing that comes right after their name. So it's almost as important as who they are to tell you these other things. We'll see probably their age, we'll have assumptions about their age, race, gender, and so on. And so you have any one individual with all these elements happening at the same time, and there are probably 35, 40 of us in here, all of these color wheels, if you will, intersecting, overlapping, integrating, and we're all trying to do work on behalf of the students. How's that going? So that gets complicated. And as I said, 10,000 faculty for me, 15,000 staff, and in every room, every day, are all these circles, including my own, as the leader of the initiative, whatever it is I'm doing on campus. And so we can understand the ways in which we need to be even more educated. I need to, this whole gender, non-binary and so forth, I had to learn much more. I mean, Dr. Lewis said, well, it's my age, and so he mentioned it, and I'm thinking, me too, because to them, to the younger students who are more fluent in this language, I'm just old school, right? So I did some work, because of course, it's our division. I need to know these things, and I want to respect others. So I went, did my reading, I had them do some workshops for us, and we listened, and we learned, and we asked the appropriate questions and the relevant questions so we could learn more. And so all these intersecting and overlapping circles working all together shows us really how difficult and beautiful our work can be. Right? I love to work and talk with young people. I love to work with international students. I love to hear from folks who have no kids, those who are in more junior positions that I might be mentoring, even though I have a senior status on campus. And so from each of these groups, it's becoming more and more important to have that exchange and that dialogue. What about income? The research shows that most students and most people on our campus and in our region would classify themselves as middle class, when in fact, according to federal standards of $40,000 for a family of 4 or lower, most of the people who put themselves in the middle class status are actually not. Why do you think that is? Why would people shade something different or say something different from what they actually are, at least from the federal standards? What do you think that's about? Yeah. Yeah. So people are ashamed of not having resources, financial resources, of saying, and I'm actually happy my parents shared some of those stories with me. My dad having 5, 6, 7 brothers, and they talked about sharing a twin bed and sleeping, lengthwise across the one bed growing up in a rural area. And I'm like, because my sister had one bed, I had one bed, I had one bedroom, she had one bedroom, and then when she was scared of the dark, I would stay in her room, but we always had more than what they had. So when they told us those stories, I thought, oh my God, what is this? But I was younger, right? As I got older, I understood the sacrifices my grandparents had to make to work the farm, to send them to the city to get an education, sent the boys to do the farm and sent the girls to the house. And they had all these systems that I didn't understand. And as I got older, I made sense of it. But they weren't ashamed of talking about being poor. Nowadays, we're finding more and more there is a stigma. People are mistreated. You're told negative things about yourself. People put on, other kinds of expressions of themselves to be outside of that category. So hopefully this is helpful, because it then shows us where the biases can emerge and it shows us that this is happening all the time and in so many complicated dimensions. Any other questions or comments about this? Is this helpful?
I think what stands out to me is are the inner dimensions, internal dimensions. Now, if somebody were to really try to get to know me on the job or outside of the job, they would have to peel back those layers, and that takes a conversation. And that takes more than just looking at me externally. And I believe that's why this model is important, so that we all can understand that we do have to communicate more about what's important to us, so that people can get to know us and be more empathetic. So that's what stands out.
I appreciate that. And I especially appreciate it because in some of the roles that I have, and when I have long bios like that being read, I kind of want to go, who's going to want to talk to me now? They're not going to think I'm fun. I've done amazing, wonderful things, but I would still like students, I still like faculty, staff, and others with whom I work at the University of California to approach me so that we can talk about strategic planning and what we might implement in our units. If they just go, oh, there goes the professor, there goes this is the vice chancellor, then we lose an opportunity to find out, oh, really, your parents came from there and had that experience? Oh, mine too, mine grew up in Oklahoma, and then we start having this conversation about parents who grew up in rural areas and went to the city for education. That's not an unfamiliar story, and I could get to talk about some of those background issues. Parental, I could talk about my children and tell you all the stories, like the volleyball and those kinds of things. Yes, sir, and then sir. Yes.
But doesn't middle class mean a great deal more than just the extent of your resources?
Yes, yes.
Isn't it also a mindset?
Yes, sir.
A belief that you have certain beliefs and a certain level of sophistication about your life that doesn't necessarily depend only on how much money you have.
Correct, correct, which is why I clarified and said by federal standards. So they would say $40,000 for a family of 4 or something along those lines. But mindset, attitude, approach to life, values even, that's connected. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, sir.
I think, and then those commonalities you spoke of finding between you and another person, once you find those, that can be the start of helping them to investigate biases and maybe break some down potentially. You find it not as different as you might have thought.
One more comment. I remember traveling to Germany to a friend who grew up where I grew up. She moved overseas. She studied languages and went to the International Bar Association. And I'm like, well, where should I say I'm from? Because some of their European friends were like, Americans, so I was kind of scared to say, well, I live in the US, so depending on who I was talking to, right? And I remember we were on the dance floor at this wedding, and out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, it's like Bob Marley came on the radio, on the sound system. And people who didn't know how to speak English, so they were mostly German and Dutch, didn't know how to speak English. All of a sudden, I shot the sheriff, and they're singing this song. And so right there we had this moment, right? There was no assumption about Americans. There was no assumption about that, or me saying Germans or Dutch, or none of that. It was just, we were singing on this dance floor, dancing, singing, playing, and all saying these English words, which I'm sure they didn't really understand. But there was a connection around music, right? And at the end, through interpreters, we were talking about that, and they danced. Some of them were dancers, and I said, oh, you play music? And there was something there through interpreters we were able to talk about. And I think because of the international barrier, at first, we thought there was nothing we could talk about. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Yes, please.
So I just noticed that with the internal dimensions and external dimensions, there's an asterisk by it. So I was wondering if, back to John David's point of like spirituality is more important to him than religion, could you possibly, I know that most personality theories are like set, but with this one, could you move some of those things that are more important to you to like an internal or external, or like say something that's not as important to you, maybe like geographic location, to like the organizational circle?
Absolutely, absolutely. Since becoming a parent, that has moved for me from the periphery internally, especially in this time of my daughter getting ready to go to college. And so that's something that I want to talk to other parents who with college-going kids. What are you all doing? What are you all doing? So that's changed for me over the years, as have other areas. So yes, absolutely, job and so forth, where I live, etc., and traveling overseas. I never thought about saying I'm American or anything like that before traveling in some of those areas. There was another hand here. Let me get more. Okay, great. Alrighty, so then this then affects decision making. So we start thinking more now, and hopefully we're going deeper into all the elements of who we are and who others are. And we're making all these decisions a day. Would you say we make like 10 decisions a day, 15? Like how many do you think we make a day? What kind of life are you living? You know what, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Every 2 seconds we're making a decision. So this talk has been going on maybe 30, 35 minutes or so. You've made a decision about dinner. You made a decision about me. You made a decision about somebody's wardrobe. You've made a decision about whether you're going to answer that text right now. If you want to turn to your neighbor and say, you know, you've made decisions about those kinds of things. We're not conscious about them. Our brain is always functioning. But you've made decisions of whether you're going to keep seated there. Actually, want to use the bathroom, whatever, I should go now. Or after the next point, or if there's a break. You're making those decisions or thinking about making those decisions if not. And so this is your brain working on overtime. And we don't even know this is happening. So I just mentioned decisions about, mostly about things like dinner and outfits and people to some degree. And those may seem inconsequential. In the same ways, you and I are making decisions about groups of people, about individuals, about hiring, about firing, about tenure, about grades, all the time. We're not conscious about that. So becoming conscious about the tens of thousands of decisions we're making in a day will help us to think through what we're deciding, how we're doing that, and on what basis. So what do you see here in this picture? What do you notice? What do you see? Bright colors. Okay, what else?
Many layers.
Many layers. Not just many, but many layers. Okay, what else?
Duplication of imagery.
Duplication of imagery. Some of the same things you see again and again in different ways. What else? You see the center. The spots. Spots. Warm colors. Somebody said hot, warm colors. So of all the things some of you mentioned, some of you didn't see, and if I tortured you and had you look at it for 10 more minutes, you'd start seeing dancing ladies over here, you'd see your parents' faces, you'd see your dinner right down here, you know. So depending on how much longer and how much more deeply you and I would look at this image, we start seeing things, probably even hearing things. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? I hear something. It's like the lady in Ghost when Whoopi Goldberg's like, wait, I hear him speaking. So this is one of those metaphors, if you will, for our work experience or life experience. Somebody, just like the dancing bear, the moonwalking bear. I didn't see it the first time I saw it. I was busy counting, like many of us were. Some people had already seen it, or if you saw it for the first time, saw it right away. I appreciated the 10, 15 voices, or maybe the 10 voices or so, who said something, because you said things. I hadn't thought about warm or hot at all, and I've seen this image 2 or 3 times. I just showed this because I love some of those colors. I like the yellow and the fuchsia, I like the brightness, and some of the people said the core, the center. I didn't think about that much, and it just reminds me of some other images that my sister's an artist, that things that she might draw or paint. So you've made decisions about something here. Whether you like this, would you want this hanging in your office, anybody? Would you want this in your office? I might. I might maybe a smaller image and be like, no, not at all. It's not my thing, right? So you have a preference there. And so you've made decisions, and I want you to take a moment to make some more decisions. Now, this is really about people. If you've done it before, forget it. Just look at it. If you have not done it, could you just wave? If you have not done this exercise. Okay. So, turn to your neighbor. So you're on a ship that is sinking. The seas are rough. All but one lifeboat has been destroyed. The lifeboat holds a maximum of 6 people. So group. There are 10 people who want to board the lifeboat. 4 individuals who do not board will certainly die. 10 people are below. A woman who thinks she's 3 weeks pregnant, a male lifeguard, 2 young adults who recently married, a senior citizen who has 15 grandchildren, an elementary school teacher, 13-year-old twins, a veteran nurse, the captain of the ship. So first, on your own, I'll give you 2 minutes. If you want to type it in your phone, write it down, just 2 minutes to think about who are the 4 people who will not board this boat. It's tough, I know it's tough. But if you don't make a decision, you're gonna die too. So you gotta decide, okay? So just for grins, if you absolutely had to, who were the 4 that you were not going to allow to go on? Just do that, 2 minutes, and then you'll turn to your neighbor and compare notes. Okay, so let's hear some of the decisions from the group in the back. Gentleman with the red sweater on behalf of that team back there.
Team, that's the best fraternity on the planet.
Oh, okay, sir.
That's the best fraternity.
Alpha. Tell me what it is.
That's the best fraternity on the planet.
Which one?
Huh? I'm just saying.
I'm glad I didn't say the. You know, I'm from Howard, so you know how that goes. All right, so.
So our group, we chose the senior citizen, the captain of the ship.
To not board?
Yes.
Okay.
Captain of the ship, the senior citizen,
yes,
and the 2 young adults who were recently married.
How could you? Why? Tell us why. Tell us why. You have to hear why. Yes.
So the captain of the ship, the reason the ship is going down.
We're assigning blame here. Okay. That's cold. Okay.
Yo, keep going, New.
Yeah.
The senior citizen.
The senior citizen.
Because she's seen life.
See what I told you about elders?
Yeah, he or she has lived a great life. You have the 2 young adults who are recently married.
They don't have kids. We decided that the kids' lives are worth saving because they have more life ahead of them. So the woman with the 3-week child should stay. The male lifeguard needs to stay because he could be helpful in taking care of the veteran nurse, even though the vet is a nurse, so the nurse may remember some practices that can help save lives as well. The 13-year-old twin children again, and the teacher
teaches children, so okay. All right, thank you. And this group here said the same thing. So all right, so I'm imagining the same rationale too. Okay, thank you. Other groups with other people that you're going to throw overboard. Who else?
We decided to throw, of course, the captain of the ship because, of course, you know, he's supposed to go down with it.
Okay.
And then we had a debate over the nurse or the elementary school teacher and one between the 2, so depending on which one of us, the senior citizen with 15 grandkids and the male lifeguard.
Because you figured he could swim on his own?
This is all very rational. Wow, amazing. Okay. One more group and then we'll move on to learn to see more of what this is about.
So I think the captain is just done for, just based on everything I've heard. So the captain's in my list as well. The woman who thinks she's pregnant because she doesn't actually know she's pregnant, and so could she just be saying that just because? See? Again, the senior citizen. Unfortunately, for the same reason everybody else said the senior citizen, the full life, and then I said one of the 2 twins, so that at least the genetic material. That's the biologist in me, sorry.
Learning some things today. Wow. I've heard it all now. Okay. Her life is like, oh my goodness. So, of course, this is not real, but I did want to challenge us to think about who we thought these persons actually were. And even based on our language, we assign gender to some of the people, even though we didn't do that here. We made assumptions, did we not? Did we think that this was the captain of the ship? That's the captain, y'all. The point is, she's gonna have to go. It doesn't matter what it is. I mention this because most of us, when we hear captain of a ship, pilot of a plane, we're not thinking this image, this person. Isn't that correct? And when there is Delta had a few, Ethiopian Airlines had a few, when we hear about woman pilot, people kind of do a double take, like, oh, it's news, like the first woman pilot for Delta, the first for Ethiopian Airlines, it becomes a news item. We're not thinking that this is who it would be. I remember years ago, gosh, close to 4 years ago when I was in high school actually, we had career days, and that was the first time that I saw a woman pilot. That was pretty progressive. I went to a girls' school. For my girls' school, too, it was somebody's mom. And I'd never thought about being one before, but I remember looking in the hallway and I saw a woman. I was like, oh, maybe she's in the military. And I did a double take and I saw the hard hat and I saw the uniform and I knew the uniform that airline wore. And I thought, she actually flies a real plane. And she gave the talk. Again, I did not become a pilot in life, but it began to occur to me that if I wanted to, I could fly a plane because I saw a woman walking outside and I heard her give a talk. Right? So this isn't usually the image. Male nurse, twins. Are you gonna put them over? Are you gonna put one over them? You know. Well, I'll tell you something. Looking at this, each of us is thinking of stories now in our background or in our past, right? So when I saw this in the exercise at that time, I remembered that career day thing almost 40 years ago. I was like, oh, I don't remember the lady's name right now, but I remember what she looked like. I was like, oh yeah, that lady, but 40 years ago I saw her. My sister is a nurse, so I have an affinity there to nurses. She's an oncology nurse, critical care, HIV/AIDS in Florida. I have, I'm sorry?
You saved her.
Oh yes, of course I saved her. Yes. Twins. I have a 13 and a 17-year-old, y'all. Like, you know, so I begin to have some affinity, or if you will, a bias towards saving these people because my sister's an oncology nurse, and I have two. I have a daughter and a son, so how could I? And I saw, so here am I having all these thoughts and images, and what if I have no connection to any of these people? Off with their heads, right? Because I don't know them, they're not familiar to me, I don't have any experience with any of these groups. It's easy for me when something is different or foreign to my experience to go, yeah, just blow them off, and we kill things off or ideas off without kind of exploring. Grandpa. See, once you get to see them and know them, right, it's not from a distance, it's not in a sheet, it's not shocking someone like the psychological experiment years ago from a distance. The further away the scientist was from the, quote, subject or the participant, the easier it was to just zap them or electrocute them, right? Ready? The young married couple. See? We all didn't have some of these images in our minds. If we're to be honest, we didn't think about this. Initially, I didn't think this was going to be the captain. I didn't think this was going to be the twins. When I saw their faces, I thought about all my friends, Zachary and Renee. I thought about my friends who are going to be celebrating Ramadan. I thought about my children. I thought about my oncology nurse sister. And I thought about the woman from Career Day, right, who I don't even know her name, Captain something. And then they became real people. Like, I know Zachary and Renee. I know the kids. I know these people now. How do I make that tough decision? Yet, we're making these decisions every 2 seconds. Every 2 seconds we're making a decision, not putting people overboard, but we're making other kinds of decisions, aren't we? Whether we're going to talk to someone, sit there or not. Studies about transportation show we tend to sit with and by people who are like us. So on the subway, when I had younger kids in strollers, I sat beside other parents. It's just something I felt comfortable doing. I thought I was safer, wasn't it? You know, or someone who looked like a relative I had, or someone else with a stroller, or maybe someone in a nurse's uniform, because my sister was a nurse. So we do these kinds of things to seek familiarity and homogeneity. Does that sound familiar to you, or does that sound just about right? How do we change that? Do you have ideas about that? Yes, step outside of our comfort zones.
I moved here.
Did you? From where?
Florida.
From Florida, yeah, absolutely. It's different, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, and I lived in Florida, lived in North Miami, and then went to California. I thought, oh, tropical, sunny, it's all the same, isn't it? It's not. It's not. And so the more I talk to people...
I'm from the West Coast. I'm from Tampa.
Oh, that's different, too. Yeah, as you get west and north, it gets a little bit different. Gainesville and all those other places are different. So stepping outside our comfort zones on purpose. On purpose. Deliberately asking the difficult questions or the uncomfortable, awkward questions to see what we might learn. So what are the types of biases? How do these show up? So there's affinity or in-group bias, which is what I just mentioned. Seeking things, people, groups that are similar to ourselves, and then aligning ourselves with those perspectives or people. So if someone looks like us, does activities like us, we are more likely, it's a human tendency, but of course we're not able to mitigate bias unless we challenge ourselves in those ways. So if something is like us, similar. Remember many years ago, Sesame Street's song, one of those things is not like the other. One of those things just don't belong. What were we teaching K through 12 at that time? Find the thing that's different. That's the thing that sticks out. And they didn't say toss it out, but there was a way in which we were conditioned to look for the differential, right? And then, of course, children, unfortunately, without that proper socialization, or at least appropriate socialization, start thinking, well, you're different, you're taller, you're skinnier, you're this, you're that, and something is wrong with that individual. But we're inclined to be with groups and believe as other groups believe that are similar to ourselves. And that can be physiological, it can be social identity, it can be class, it can be education level, etc. There's also what's known as the halo or the horn effect. We make decisions based on first impressions. You know that saying, we never get a second chance to make a first impression. Thank my colleague for saying going out of the box, because if we just depended on the first impression of every one of us in here, we wouldn't have any friends, we wouldn't have any colleagues, we would not speak to each other. You know, if you trip over something, if you say the wrong word, if somebody saw you acting out in the grocery store, or saw you doing some of the things that some of us do in traffic, if we made decisions on that initial impression only, then we will be caught in a cycle of bias. And so, with the halo effect, if the most positive thing that we saw was at the very beginning of that interaction, the downside is we tend to ignore critical or information that might tell us something else to give us that holistic, integrated, and complex picture of an individual. And if we take the negative thing about an individual as the initial impression and run with that, then we miss positive pieces of information about that person and that thing or that group. Again, we have to inquire, we have to be critical, we have to be curious, and move from there. Following along, everything going okay? Okay, cool. So there's affinity or in-group bias, halo or horn effect, so we assign meaning based on that initial impression. Then there's confirmation bias. Other people believe the same thing we believe, and so we go along with them. So whether you watch or read Fox or MSNBC or CNN, it's based on watching, listening to, reading positions that align with your own. So the confirmation bias is, see, of course, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. Because they're saying or repeating things that you already believe. So we support or prefer information or evidence that aligns with our own beliefs and our own attitudes. And we do away with or dismiss information that's different from our own. Isn't that true? Can you think of any examples where we might do this? And how it might show up? I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, I just said CNN and Fox and MSNBC. When else or how else? Yes, in fact, yes, ma'am.
Football.
Football. Tell me more.
Redskins fans always make excuses for their team.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you don't want to hear it, all right?
Somebody's coming for you.
Don't come for me, okay? I'm just saying that. Football is an example of confirmation bias.
Yes.
Even when your team is losing, you still justify their
what? And so you only stick with other Redskins fans and you go to the other people who don't align with
My team was the Ravens and we did win.
Okay.
It was the Ravens.
Oh, you were agreeing. Okay, so she was confirmation. So she's confirming what you're saying. So you two are a part of a pair of supporting Redskins. My father was like that as well. Had season tickets, the whole thing. It doesn't matter what you said. That was it. Yes, sir.
If we keep with the sports metaphor, I had my students look at the proposition that men are always better athletes and decide, is there truth in that statement? And it depends on the criteria that you use. If better athlete means stronger and larger, then there's some truth in it. But if it's greater agility and artistic expression, like a Simone Biles, rather than a Hulk Hogan,
right,
then the woman would be the better athlete. But I had them view that so that they could see that there are other categories or other criteria for determining what the best athlete is.
Absolutely.
It's not always just because you're stronger or bigger. Sometimes it's because you are more expressive or can do more with your talent.
Absolutely. So you challenge them by raising the question of evidence and criteria. And using solely criteria to make that determination, not gender.
I proposed a stereotype and said, is the stereotype one that you can truly justify?
Question, yeah.
Or is it something that you have to question?
I love it. That's great. Thank you, sir. In my family, on my in-law side, they're very tall. And so when my son was living, he took over playing soccer. My family's happy about that. Some of my family members were worried, particularly my husband, who is an engineer, physicist, and he said, tall players can't play soccer well. I was like, what? And those of you who are into physics, he talked about when you come out of the block or when you're running down the field or whatever it is, the tall person has more work to do to balance their weight than the more petite person who literally was closer to the ground. So that field force, I guess, is lower or less for that individual. And I tried to follow his thinking, and I was like, here's what I see when I see the tall kid running. That child has longer strides, and when he is making one, somebody who's petite or shorter like myself is making 2 or 3 to catch up, and my son Joel always makes the goal first, because he's just faster. Now he's taller, and it's true, it's kind of like Usain Bolt at 6'5". Tall athletes typically don't run track well at very fast speeds, short distances, and that was just an anomaly. Like, how does that happen? And if you look at Bolt run, his starts are always challenging if you're into that world at all. And his coaches talked about working with him on that and saying he can overcome this challenge. And so this question of, and German soccer players are actually pretty tall as well. So that challenged the Brazilian, Argentinian body type that we'd seen before, like Maradona in the 80s and others. I thought, oh, there's something here, you know. So there are ideas that we have about who's a good athlete, who plays better in one sport or another, and we had to challenge that in our family around height and soccer and speed. So, okay, great discussion. There was another idea or point around this. Yes, sir?
Well, this is supposed to home here, the confirmation bias of community college versus four-year universities.
Say more.
You know, the bias would be that the community college student just couldn't make it in to the four-year university, or that the word in some of my classes is the 13th grade, versus the fact that the bias is confirmed by a lot of maybe even high schools, that when they have these career days, Prince George's Community College is not among the, you know, like if my kids go to school, oh dad, Maryland came to the school today, or you know, a Big Ten school came to the school today. And even when some of these graduation ceremonies, and they rack off in these high school graduation ceremonies how much aid was given out and everything like that, they're not mentioning Prince George's Community College or other community colleges. But the fact of the matter is, it's a more economical way to get yourself, because after you're done, you are not paying as much, you know, but the bias continues on, where now it's like, it's confirmed that these kids are like, well, I want to go to PG Community College. That's not where I want to go, and that's I think that's the confirmation bias.
It's pervasive in U.S. higher ed, I think. It's the same thing with us. We're doing a big push. I think almost 40% of our students are transfer students. And there's a slot. Our president, we didn't talk about women, our president is Janet Guffey. We like her a lot, and we like that she has slotted spots in the UC system up to 40% for transfer students. And the fanfare and the presentations and the welcome they get is just as good as, if not better, than what the four-year students get coming in, because we are counteracting that bias, and we know it's there.
That's right.
So it is something we're all working on, right? And I've worked in both systems, and Trinity was Trinity College before, with a similar type system before it became university. So knowing it is there, this is awesome, right? So we're steps ahead of this. Knowing it is there, we can continue to work with our four-year institutions, within our current institution, with our K-12 institutions, and so I always think in terms of big systems. Thanks for raising that. Recency bias. Not far from first impression bias, but the thing that you've seen most recently about an individual, group, or thing is the thing that you favor or you might be prejudiced against. Did you have some snow recently? A few months back when I was in the sunshine? Actually, we were in rain. We had all the rain in California. So, okay, maybe I shouldn't say anything. I'm making enemies here. Bias. So, recency bias would mean that based on the experiences you had in the winter, if your car broke down in the winter, four-door sedan, Honda Civic, Honda Accord, when you're thinking about buying another car the week after the snowstorm, research shows you're probably going to choose a truck. You're going to be biased towards choosing a truck, especially if your car broke down. You're going, you know, this old Honda, it can't take me anywhere. away with the Honda, I'm gonna go with the truck, right? And that can be with people too. If you look at any of those elements of that color wheel, you may have had a negative experience with someone from a particular region, gender, ethnicity, class group, another institution. And so when you see someone else from that institution or that cultural, social, racial group, you might say, oh, I don't want to deal with those people again. Whatever, fill in the blanks, whatever that group is. In this case, it's a bias against or for a thing. And so you're more likely, the research shows, if you just had a thunderstorm, a rainstorm, or a bad car experience, to think about a truck next because you're now biased based on your most recent experience. And the same thing with things and the same thing with people. Conformity bias. If I were to ask you from Exhibit 2, which item is most close in height to Exhibit 1, which line would you say? Do we all agree it's A? What if I told you were wrong and it were B? Would you start thinking about it being B because I said it was B? Probably, yeah. Well, she's like, no, I'm stuck with it. Well, in one of the studies, this is where I got this diagram, in one of the studies about 10 years ago, there was a group that was told by the researcher that B was actually the right answer. Go into the group like this, tell them it's B, convince them it's B, and see how that shifts what happens in the room. Do you know wonderful, brilliant, sensible, beautiful people like you said, oh yeah, she's right, it's B. Sensible people, educated, and they've done this with medical groups and business groups, were convinced it was B. I didn't do enough of the work to convince you eventually. Give me half an hour, I'll get you there. But could you believe that could happen? How could that happen? Clearly, to us, first glance, it's the shortest line there. At least that's what we think. How do you think someone was able to convince another person and most of the group to go with B? Yes, ma'am.
When you're faced with someone that seems more educated or someone that's in a position of authority, for example, I'm a student here and my professor says that the answer is B. There's nowhere in the world that I'm going to circle C because the professor is telling me something. They're educated, they have the PhD, they have the clout, they have all these things. And even if, I have years of experience, I've traveled all over the world, this is someone that's holding my grade to a standpoint, so I have to agree with them. In the situation that you're presenting is people don't want to be the other. So they're seeing other people that are as intelligent or more intelligent as them in a position of authority or someone they look up to and saying the answer is clearly C. They're like, well, okay, perhaps.
So that's what we found in the study, based on power dynamics, based on location, based on education, based on the number of people agreeing with that person. I didn't want to be the one who stuck out, so I said, okay, it's B, although my best mind said it's really A. Another thought, yes, sir?
So that's like saying, who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes?
Ooh, yeah, something like that, isn't it? Yeah, to you, it makes perfect sense. It's A, of course. But when 2 and 3 and 10 and 15 other people start saying the same thing, this is just a line here, people, but if it's an impression about an individual, if it's something about a neighborhood, if it's about the car, the Honda Accord, and I tell you my story, you go, yeah, maybe that's true. And next thing you know, I'm driving a truck too. I start changing my mind. What are your thoughts, ma'am, in the back?
No, I was just going to say, I also think it's tied to self-esteem in the sense that when you talk about conformity and group dynamics and, popular opinion, two things happen. Either one, I don't feel as if was being spoken a few minutes ago, I don't feel like I have the information or experience to make a good decision, or I'm not fully convicted of what I believed in the first place. So to me, in terms of conformity bias, you're talking a little bit in all of these cases about self-esteem and what I really believe about myself and how my value as a person that really contributes to my ability to, if you come and try to tell me it's B, I'm going to say, well, you can believe it's B, we're going to respectfully disagree because what I'm seeing is A.
You're sure about yourself and your perspective on that.
Right.
Thank you for sharing that. So it's bias based on group pressure, peer pressure, groupthink. All of us who study communication and psychology, we've seen this at work. The Challenger disaster in 1986. To some degree, there's some studies being done about 9/11 and people who are convinced they should leave. Why did they stay? Security officers, law enforcement said stay, stay, stay. Some CEO said stay, it's going to be okay. We've called the firefighters. We're on top of the situation. It's all okay. And those wonderful, beautiful, wise people follow the authority figures and trek back up the stairs, right? And so we know some of that. And some people were just determined to go. And in a crisis situation, sometimes that decision-making gets skewed and based on what others are doing, we also do it, and we're biased towards the authority figure. We ignore or we trust less our internal voice. It's not right or wrong per se, right? But we can see how the consequences can be detrimental. If it's a hire, if it's a certain assessment, if it's tenure, if it's a parking spot, whatever it is, some conversation with law enforcement. If other people are saying you should do a particular thing, that will influence you and bias, shift your bias, if you will, towards the group as a whole, as opposed to acknowledging and really paying attention to that internal voice. So those are the types of bias: in-group, conformity, and so forth. Here are the forms, and we've been referencing some of those, so I think we can move through these fairly quickly. The context is that the forms of bias are present in all kinds of interactions. Interpersonal interactions, which are one-on-one, in group settings, I mentioned some of those, evaluation, interviewing, hiring, which can happen in both individual and group settings. So we're most prone to implicit bias, the ones that I just talked about: conformity, the first impressions, halo, horn effect, in group. When we're in a one-on-one situation, I'll say, oh, she's a nurse like my sister, and I'll probably be drawn to you more because you're in healthcare and you do that kind of work. Oh, I work with a lot of physicians at work. Oh, my daughter wants to do something in healthcare, and I'm kind of drawn to listening to them and hearing more from them because of that similarity. At the same time, I can be biased as well, because coming from the social sciences, sometimes I go, sometimes my STEM colleagues, because when we're in conversations, and I'm married to a STEM person, the conversations are very logical. And sometimes I just want to be emotional. I don't want to hear, well, logically, sometimes I don't want to hear all of that, right? And I'm thinking there are other aspects of interaction here. Can we talk about, so I draw to my artist friends and my friends from other disciplines who I think agree with me. Don't you know what I'm saying? And then I get some support there. But there's bias even in that. Am I really open to my STEM colleagues? Am I really listening with an open heart and mind? Or am I judging them for not being in the disciplines where I've studied, or quantitative versus qualitative and so forth? Group setting. So this is the context where these biases can show up, if you will. And we've talked about some of these, so this hopefully is now more familiar. We see this in multi-generational contexts: younger people, older people, people in the middle, those who are over 70. In fact, in the research, Tom Brokaw's work some years ago referred to 65 and 70 plus as the silent generation, and boomers are late 50s, early 60s. Millennials, born somewhere between, I think, mid-80s to going to mid-90s or so, and then Gen Z somewhere in the 2000s. And all of these groups have particular ways. Yes?
Gen X got left out as usual.
Gen X between, and I'm in there, I shouldn't have done this. I think Gen X is between 65 and 82. I know, they forgot us, and we're pulling everything up, we're in the middle of both, right? And so this, according to Pew and Gallup and all these wonderful research organizations, we are in a time when we have the most multi-generational workforce than we ever had before. And that is because after the recession, many of our parents and grandparents, including some of us, wanted to retire, but couldn't, and or retired, and guess what? Had to return to the workforce. And so you may have a span from 19, 18 years old to 75 years old. So the 18-year-old's working for their great-grandparent perhaps, and those of us in the middle are working with our grandparents or parents. My parents are like 80-something at this point, around 80. And so we could be working for people in those ages, and we all have different values. We all have different values. What do you think are some of those values of people who are 65 plus? According to Pew, there are 3 top values, or some things that 65 plus value more than millennials or Gen Z. Do you know what some of those are? Authority. So respect is one of them, which is connected to that.
Respect and authority.
Absolutely.
There's one about it, I think in the workplace, because I gave
Work ethic. Work ethic is one of them. Respect.
I think hierarchy and
well, which is connected to authority. And then there's the work ethic and the sense of honesty and respect. You know, so your word is your bond. Like those, you don't hear a 19-year-old saying your word is your bond, or 40-year-olds. You'll hear 50, I know, she's like, that was a big LOL right there. So things like honesty, respect, work ethic. And that looks a particular way for that age group. And of course it varies in terms of intersectional identities. People from different cultures have different ideas about that within those age groups. So you can imagine the potential for conflicts and the potential for bias between 19 and 75, when respect is so important to me, and students text teachers, hey, and I'm like, pardon? You know? Yeah, right. So those of you who are in that age group are like, excuse me, or hey Diane, I'm like, excuse me, you know? And that happened in my office actually recently, you know, California. I'm more informal when I'm there now, so some of the student workers do call me Diane. But one day my boss said, did you know you called by my first name? She's older, she's from Texas. And I said, you did? Because, I mean, she's the vice chancellor, so that's huge. She's a cabinet member, and you hear how big the institution is, so she has a lot of authority. And she came in one day, and this dear student worker said, hey, Becky. And so, yeah, I'm not lying. So she came to me, I don't supervise student workers, but she came to me, and I was shocked. So I was like, so what are you going to do? And she said, I'm going to tell him it's Dr. Pettit, or it's Vice Chancellor Pettit. I was like, you're going to tell him? She's like, I'll just ask my assistant to tell him something. We didn't want a showdown. We didn't want an intergenerational showdown, right? So her assistant really supervises student workers, so she thought in terms of authority, she should respect that. And so she asked Michelle to have that conversation, and the next day, good afternoon, Dr. Pettit, like that, you know, because I was like, well, he called you by your title, didn't he? And I was like, yes. And I said, what do you think that is, you know? And she's like, it's my upbringing in Texas. You know, she talked about her cultural background and those kinds of things. I'm between both, you know, and so her partner said, well, I let the students call me by their first, she works in a teaching center, she's like, I let the students call me by my first name because I can be more accessible to them. And I let the student workers, not students who I teach, but student workers call me that for that reason, you know. And then in other settings, the title is really important because people think I'm younger than I am, and so depending on where I am, I'll look and I say, well, everybody else was called by their title in this meeting. In the medical school, in medicine, the title is, oh my God. The MPHs, the MDs, different from the PhDs, different from the MSNs, different from the RNs and so forth. Okay, so everybody got their title, and it's like, and Diane now is going to come, like, so then it becomes this thing of like, is that my age? Is that cultural? What is that? Is it about being a woman and so forth? So there are all these conflicts that can occur during this time. I'm getting the signal. All right, so gender, we've talked about some of those biases that can occur. Can girls do these things? Can women do these things? And then because of our racial history in this country, structural and other organizational barriers and biases, we continue to struggle along the lines of race in the US and throughout the world. So these are types of biases that can show up. Ones that we don't pay as much attention to, size. There's research about people's size, their height, their appearance. We make assumptions about that. Religion, if someone's wearing a hijab, sometimes we have thoughts and ideas on the plane, in the airport. Some of us are susceptible to believing certain things about those groups that have English as a second language, and ability or disability. We make assumptions if we see someone in a wheelchair, if someone has a learning disability, and so on. What do we do about this? First, and I think we're already there, I've owned some of mine, acknowledge that we all have biases. Don't run and hide and say, oh, no, not me. We all do. Let's start there. And if you take the implicit bias test and or looking at the color wheel, kind of examine our assumptions about each of those groups, we can make many steps. So as Anais Nin says, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. We see things how we see things based on our experiences, our preferences, our background. Just like the art piece that I showed you earlier, you're looking at pieces that you like, colors you prefer, formations you prefer, designs you prefer. So let's think then about how we might institute shifts in our attitudes and our behaviors. So as if you're leaders on campus, some things that you might think about, and if you are in other roles, think about ways that we can shift our attitudes. I started with great answers already. Step outside of your box, have a conversation, go beyond the externals, develop curiosity. If you are curious about this, there's work being done now in the Northeast, somewhat of Michigan, somewhat of Harvard, around curiosity quotient and adaptability quotient. So we talk about intelligence quotient and emotional quotient, EQ and IQ. But newer work now has been done around curiosity quotient, such as I ask questions. I prefer puzzles as opposed to riddles. I am a daredevil when I don't know something. So there are lots of questions to see how curious are you really? And if you take that test and you find you're in the middle or on the lower end of it, let's start asking more questions. Let's start doing more puzzles, whether that means in systems or otherwise. Humility, great work being done out of Hopkins and UNC on cultural humility as an adaptation, if you will, to the concept of cultural competence. And cultural competence talks mostly about intellectual understanding of culture, whereas cultural humility talks about an introspective understanding of culture, that curiosity about the culture, the knowledge that I don't know everything, and the investment in co-learning. And so that I'm learning with you what it means to be Muslim. I was at a mosque the other day after they had burnt, right after New Zealand, not far from our house, they burnt a mosque. And so a number of us in the community just went there during prayer time, just went there. I'd never done that before. And many of us ended up crying, not because of just the burning and the sadness of the children and the families and all of that, but we ended up crying because of this other world that's out there that we know nothing about except through TV and social media. We met Youssef and all their children and all the other family friends, and they cried too, saying, thank you for even coming to stand with us. I'm not Muslim. I don't have many Muslim friends, but I made a few that day, and we're going to continue that community relationship. But they had not seen that before. But this New Zealand thing prompted many of us to step forward and to address and even challenge our biases if we had any. Openness and investment in perspective taking. So curiosity, take that curiosity test. Look, it's called Curiosity Profile. It was in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, and they've done other work since then to find out where you are on that continuum. On what basis are you drawing conclusions? So doing some self, group, and systems analyses. Asking the critical questions about the basis on which I'm drawing that conclusion. Going through all the biases. Is it the last time I saw that person, or somebody like that, or that thing? Is it because other people are saying, we know what happens with that group or that person? Stereotypes? Is it because of how that person's aligned with the way I think or believe? And so this can be internal work as well as on search committees. This is wonderful, just asking, well, why do you think that? And here's some of the things that we can be very aware of. And if you are in those kinds of roles to streamline these processes, establish criteria and rubrics. So the professor who talks about what does it mean to be a good athlete, let's establish those criteria. If it's a job, if it's a good student, well, who is a good student? And what are we talking about there? And what do we need for that student to be as successful as possible? Let's establish some kind of a rubric. In hiring, interviewing, assessment, evaluation, here are some key terms and phrases that people throw around in organizations often, and they don't get qualified in any substantive way. That person's too meek, might be a maverick, or too pushy. So let's unpack, let's deconstruct what we mean by that, and are we using those words with certain types of people, and people in certain member groups, pushy, maverick, or meek? Here are some others. Well, I don't think he's a fit here, or she is a fit for this position or this role or this institution. What do we mean by that? That's another code word. That's another red flag. And if I had that pink and yellow, I just kind of flashed that in the room at that point. We're making that decision. What do we mean by that? Fit for what, fit for whom, fit in what ways, and how do these align with the rubrics and criteria we've established? Like asking those critical questions and not worrying about conformity bias. Like really at that point stepping out and doing the ethical and the right thing, to asking those questions. Here's another one. Yeah, I just don't know. I can't put my finger on it. I just don't know. Well, what do you mean? Can you say more? I don't know, but no, we're just not going with that. We're not going with that person. We're not going with that decision. May I ask why? And wait. Don't argue. Don't go back and forth. Just wait. So these are techniques and strategies that we can use. And most often on search committees, if we've trained our committees well, or there are other evaluations or assessments or other decisions we're making, and we have aware and critical leaders, which I believe you all are, you can ask these questions in those spaces and shift the organizational and group dynamics from what it could become to something that's more comprehensive and honest. Other organizational strategies, as I wrap it up, seek multiple perspectives. Like, I like this room. Can you all come work with me? You know, because a lot of things that you've mentioned here are not things I would have accessed or known or experienced in the same ways that you explained them today, or in the same ways that you thought about it. I wouldn't have used a Redskins example, I wouldn't have thought about the athletic question, I wouldn't have thought about some of the other things that you mentioned here, but you're speaking from your experience and from what you know and what matters to you in this institution. The two-year institution bias, for example. I know about it on the other side, receiving transfer students, right? And knowing what our four-year institution as a top-tier Research One institution might think, particularly my STEM colleagues, who might worry, honestly, about rigor and the quality of the institution. We hear this a lot. It's in the scholarship, and I experientially have that knowledge too. So seek multiple perspectives, not the same people from the same regions, the same groups. Regular professional development, this is happening now, owning it as a group, as I talked about earlier, collaborative work, and slowing down. Slowing down. I know we're in time-pressed environments, and so that leads me to, and I'll quickly do this one, constructive uncertainty. I'll mention it, because I think I'm really out of time now. Howard Ross writes quite a bit about constructive uncertainty, and that's thinking about, rather than simply reducing uncertainty, which communication scholars study quite a bit, but thinking about uncertainty as constructive, something that can be helpful to us. So when we do not know, instead of thinking about lack of knowledge as a deficit, think about it as an opportunity for knowledge sharing, for co-learning, for inquiry, and for new knowledge. So knowledge production and knowledge sharing. And so Ross writes about that and asks us to defer, slow down, and check decision making. Okay, so I have 2 slides on that, but I'll move through. This final bullet here I do want to talk about. Wherever we end a sentence with an exclamation point, but of course, he suggests in terms of transitional thinking to end that with a question. Of course that person shouldn't be here. Should that person be here? You know, asking the question of ourselves and of the others. So wherever we end with an exclamation point, on constructive uncertainty asks us to make that more inquiry-based rather than fact-based, because often we know people can change and shift facts to suit the circumstances, and it often aligns with our biases. So if you want to read more about that, Howard Ross writes about that. And then Joan Williams from University of California, San Francisco writes about bias interrupters, and she does quite a bit of work in law and in social work about this. And so that's changes in how we function and how we work to interrupt, disrupt, implicit, but most often implicit, but sometimes you can do that with explicit as well. And so there are examples in her work if you'd like to read more about how she does that. And it can be at the individual level, you're asking critical questions, and or the organization. I'll give you one example, then I'll open it for your questions. So she talks about patterns and strategies. So a pattern could be, the pattern is called stolen idea. X person, no name or anything, makes a suggestion in a meeting for which someone else gets the credit. And you can think about which groups that might happen in or with. As someone who is going to be a bias interrupter and or enact bias interruption strategies, you can say things such as, I've been thinking about it, I've been pondering that ever since X said it. Because then you're putting it back to Sally, or putting it back to Sam, or Jamal, or whoever said it first, instead of putting, well, Diane said it, meanwhile, somebody else in the room said it first. As someone who's paying attention to that organizational dynamic, I would then say as an ethical person, well, I really thank X for saying that. It was very important that X said it, and I'd like to support. So as in my Diane's voice, I can interrupt it, and you can also interrupt it by what you've seen. Instead of necessarily causing a fight per se, or some kind of a conflict with that individual, you can speak up in a leadership role to correct that dynamic. Have we seen this before? Yes? All
right, so what if you're X?
Who was the first person who did it? If you can speak up for yourself, then you can do the same. But in many cases, because of conformity bias and power dynamics, that the idea would never be stolen if you weren't prone to having it being stolen from you, meaning more junior, or maybe more introverted, or not as influential, maybe more church says. I'm not going to stand for that. Let me step up on my little podium here. But so we see these dynamics with people with less power, most often with less power, and so they're not willing or able to take the risk to step forward. So having all that information, re-looking at some of the images and the things that we know, we're going to be asking new questions. Why did we put that person overboard? Why did you notice the center? Why did you not see the dancing women on the side? Everybody's looking for them. Where are they? Where are they? Too late, too late, too late! I'll catch you later. And so now we're making decisions about these kinds of things. As this situation came back around, I'm hoping that you would see it differently. And you would find the humanity here, you would find not just what's similar or homogeneous, but you'd think about the difference and the question marks that you might place at the end. So we've talked about what implicit explicit biases are, the types and the forms with some interesting examples along the way. And I've shared with you how we can think about mitigating both on the individual level and the organizational level bias for more constructive and more functional organizations, and how you might interrupt them as leaders of our institution. So I thank you all for your time and attention. I'd be happy to take questions. I know we took some questions in between and some comments and observations. If there are other thoughts that you didn't have a moment to ask that you'd like to ask now or share with your colleagues, I'd be happy to hear them.
Will this be available? Yes.
Yes, a version of it will be available, yes, correct, yes. Comments or questions? I guess it was a pretty active group throughout, so yeah. We got our comments in. Thank you all very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Berthoud. This will be available, we taped it, and it will be available at a link that we will send out to everyone. So for those of you who are listening to us over Zoom, you'll be able to see it later on. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Faculty Senate members, for working on this. Thank you, presenters. Thank you, Dr. Raley. And we hope to continue this conversation with all the information you got from this point onwards. Thank you and have a good evening.